Thousands of years ago, a great war was taking place between wizards around the world, and before he left, the great wizard Merlin gave his greatest secrets to his 3 disciples, Balthazar, Veronica and Horvath, so that they could win the war. One night, Merlin was surprised by the powerful Morgana, and just as he was about to defeat her, Merlin was surprised by Horvath, who freed one of Morgana's arms, allowing the sorceress to defeat the legendary wizard. The pair of Morgans then take the page of the resurrection of the deceased spell, but are stopped by Balthazar. Before the wizard can stop the traitor from escaping, he ends up being knocked down by Morgana, who prepares to finish him off. Trying to prevent her teammate from being eliminated, Veronica reflects the evil sorceress attacks, capturing her soul and imprisoning it in her own body. The problem is that Morgana is still trying to escape from Veronica's body, and in order to save her friend's life, Balthazar decides to trap them both in a cursed receptacle. After the battle, shortly before his perishment, Merlin gave his pupil the dragon ring, saying that it would guide Balthazar to the child who would eventually become his successor and be named the first Merlinian. So Balthazar traveled all over the world in search of the child who could inherit the powers of the great Merlin and defeat Morgana, otherwise humanity would be destroyed. Hundreds of years later, in New York City, David wakes up for another day at school, where he takes his class on a field trip to the Statue of Liberty. During the expedition, the young man decides to give Becky a romantic note, but before he can retrieve the object to read his friend's reply, the paper ends up being blown away by the wind. Desperate, David runs around the city trying to retrieve his love letter, and after traveling through much of the area, the student arrives at a deserted street, where he finds his note stuck on the door of a mysterious store. As he walks through the door, David realizes that the place is a store selling ancient artifacts and is surprised by Balthazar. Upon realizing the great coincidence that brought him to his store, the man reveals the dragon ring to the young man and explains that he can keep the magical item if he manages to connect with it. With that, the wizard places the metallic dragon in the young man's hand, at which point the object begins to move on its own, attaching itself to one of its new owner's fingers. Noticing that he has finally found the first Merlinian, Balthazar feels extremely relieved and asks David to wait for him while he searches for a second gift, his own book of charms. Quickly, the man runs down to the basement of the establishment, and while he waits, the boy continues to analyze his new ring. At that moment, David notices that his spells are manipulating some object around him, and by repeating the same movement, the young man destroys part of the wall of the room, making him find Balthazar's magical doll. Thanks to the fall, a huge number of cockroaches begin to emerge from the arcane receptacle, and after uniting, the insects turn into Horvath, who is finally free of his curse. Now that he has returned, the evil sorcerer prepares to eliminate David, but is quickly hit by Balthazar, who throws him towards the roof. Soon after, the man tries to retrieve his magic doll, but before he can trap the traitor again, Horvath manages to grab his staff and uses it to strike his opponent, allowing him to break free. Despite this, Balthazar doesn't give up, and sets off furiously towards his enemy, who tries to eliminate him with various destructive spells. During the fight, David runs to get away from the confrontation, and looks at the magic doll, which shows the face of yet another sorcerer, who will be freed if the receptacle is opened again. While they exchange several blows, Horvath tries to gain an advantage. The man controls one of the swords in the place with his magical powers, and tries to eliminate his former teammate. To avoid being hit by the man, the sorcerer takes one of his ancient shields and uses it to immobilize the sword and knock Horvath down. Seizing his chance, Balthazar tries to fire his electric spells at his enemy, who uses his flaming powers to set the whole place on fire while trying to escape. David ends up being caught by Horvath, but before he can retrieve the receptacle, the man is grabbed by his opponent, who orders the young man to flee as quickly as possible. At that moment, one of the ancient urns falls to the ground, and in order to end the fight once and for all, Balthazar grabs Horvath's arm, causing both wizards to be sucked into the object. Desperate, David runs outside, and after throwing the doll away, he is found by his teacher, and tells her everything he has just witnessed. Believing that her student may be lying, the woman goes to find out what is going on, but noticing that the store is completely normal, she orders the boy to stop making up stories. Thanks to this, all the students start making fun of the young man, who feels extremely ashamed, and doesn't even realize that the wizards are actually trapped inside the magic urn. 10 years later, David is preparing to present his latest scientific invention, but at that moment, the wind knocks over all his papers, so that he has to run around the place to retrieve them. In doing so, David runs into Becky, his old childhood crush, and after the school day, the young people walk together through the city, and the girl reveals that she is working at the university radio station. During the conversation, a large bolt of lightning strikes the building's tower, and noticing that all the establishment's systems have been compromised, David offers to fix them, and after getting the radio signal flowing again, he leaves. Far away, an elderly couple notice that one of their decorative urns is moving on its own, and before they can throw the antique away, they are surprised by Horvath, who finally manages to break free. Realizing that he was the first to escape from the cursed prison, the sorcerer throws the object out of the window so that he can eliminate Balthazar, but the man wastes no time and holds onto one of the edges of the building, preventing himself from falling. Now that he's free, Horvath sets off towards David's apartment, while Balthazar runs to the top of one of the buildings and uses his spell to bring one of the decorative metal birds on the terrace to life, gaining a new monstrous pet. Upon arriving home, the university student is greeted by the evil sorcerer, and noticing that the young man won't tell him the location of the receptacle, he decides that he will eliminate him. Desperate, David tries to flee the scene, and so that he can capture his target, Horvath summons a group of macabre wolves, who begin to chase the young man through the streets of the city. In a few seconds, the magical animals manage to corner the university student, but before they can eliminate their target, they end up being transformed into puppies by Balthazar, who appears riding his large metallic bird. Furious, Horvath tries to hit David with his attacks, but is stopped by the sorcerer, who casts a time deceleration spell on his opponent, allowing him to rescue the young man. Now that they are reunited, Balthazar explains that his former teammate intends to free all the Morgans from the magical receptacle, and if that happens, the whole world will be destroyed by these evil beings. Despite this, David refuses to continue being part of all this madness, and on hearing this, the sorcerer pulls the young man's dresser out onto the terrace and takes the draconic ring that the university student has been keeping all this time. Balthazar proposes that the young man help him in the fight against Horvath, and tells him that once they have prevented the world from being destroyed by the evil beings, he can go on with his life as normal. On hearing this, David accepts the proposal, and the wizard begins a tracking spell, using the clouds to reveal the location of the receptacle. With that, Balthazar notices that the object is in the center of the city, and so that they don't attract too much attention with his metallic bird, he decides to retrieve his car, allowing the pair to travel through the city peacefully. Meanwhile, Horvath arrives at the old arcane store, and uses his powers to rewind the events of the past, where he discovers that the doll was taken by an old lady, who took the object to Chinatown. During a big festival in the Chinatown area, Balthazar asks David to wait for him outside, while he enters one of the buildings looking for the receptacle, and on entering the place, he is greeted by the old woman who had collected the doll. When he comes across the lady, the sorcerer realizes that it's actually Horvath, and throws him to the other side of the establishment. Now that he has been discovered, the traitor reveals that he has managed to free another of his evil allies, and looking back, Balthazar ends up being surprised by Sunloke, one of the magical demons, who tries to hit him with hundreds of acupuncture needles. Quickly, the wizard uses his jacket to block the projectiles, and then hits the man with a thrust, causing him to be thrown through the window of the building, landing right in front of David. Frightened, the university student tries to flee the scene, and in order to eliminate his target, Sunloke transforms the festival dragon into a real creature, leaving all the pedestrians completely terrified. Noticing the danger his apprentice is in, Balthazar manipulates the confetti to stun the monster, blocking his vision and allowing David to get away from the place. Despite this, Sunloke continues to pursue his target, causing the dragon to destroy a large part of one of the buildings on the site while trying to capture the university student. Now that he has managed to chain Horvath in one of the apartments, Balthazar rushes over to his apprentice and orders him to try and concentrate in order to defeat the creature. Desperate, David climbs the stairs, and after reaching the top, he hits the dragon with a flaming spell, allowing his master to hit Sunloke with his fireball, causing the monster to be completely destroyed. So that they can continue their mission, Balthazar says they need a new hiding place, and the young man reveals that they can use his workshop to hide from Horvath. Now that they are safe, the wizard hands his book of charms to his apprentice, and after conjuring the initiation ritual, he begins his magical training. Despite Balthazar's demonstrations, David remains lost, having his spells hit him again and again as he tries to control his powers. Soon after, the young man manages to learn how to reflect flaming spells, but his tutor wastes no time and starts hitting him with his electric coils, so that his apprentice can get used to dodging attacks. Far from there, Horvath goes to Drake's building, one of the last remaining Morgans on the planet, who makes a living as a successful magician, and so that they can capture the university student, the two decide to team up. Later, David and Becky are walking together through the subway station when they are suddenly accosted by a criminal, who runs off with the young woman's belongings. Annoyed, the sorcerer's apprentice decides to chase the bandit, and after using his ring to deactivate the exits, he tries to attack him with his fire spells. The problem is that David still doesn't have full control of his power and ends up setting fire to one of the dumpsters. Despite this, the young man manages to take advantage of the criminal's distraction to hit him with the object, knocking him out and allowing him to recover Becky's belongings. With that, the girl thanks her friend for his help, and after arranging a meeting in his laboratory, she leaves. The next day, Balthazar continues training his apprentice, but when he notices that Becky has just arrived, he decides to leave so that the university students can study in peace. At the end of his studies, David decides to show his newest invention to his friend, where the Tesla coils start to play music amidst all the electrical discharges. In the morning, the university student accompanies Becky to class, but before leaving, he decides to go to the bathroom and ends up being found by Drake. After pinning the young man to the wall and making fun of his powers, the evil sorcerer orders him to try and hit him with all his strength, but nothing happens, as David still doesn't have full control of his magic ring. At that moment, Horvath appears on the scene, and before he can eliminate the young man, he is surprised by Balthazar, who levitates Drake's body in the air and throws him against the lockers. David's tutor quickly casts one of his spells on the bathroom mirror and tries to trap his opponent in it. As a result, the wizards fight in front of the magic portal, and noticing that Drake is about to hit his master, David warns Balthazar, who dodges the attack, causing Horvath to be thrown into the mirror. Soon after, the man knocks out the evil Morgan with his impulse magic, allowing the pair to escape safe and sound, while Horvath waits until someone can free him from the arcane prison. Later, Horvath and Drake go to the local university and hypnotize the attendants so that they can discover the location of David's laboratory. Now that they are safe, Balthazar explains to his apprentice about Morgana's plans, and tells him that in order to stop the evil woman, they will have to practice more and more. Despite this, the university student claims that he had arranged to meet Becky, and asks his master to go for a walk while he has some time alone with his friend. Now that he is alone on the premises, David begins to use his spells to manipulate the objects around him, allowing him to clean much more efficiently. Taking advantage of the fact that he won't have to take part in the cleanup, the university student gets ready for the meeting, but when he returns to his laboratory, he realizes that the place is completely flooded. The young man then tries to order the bewitched objects to stop moving, but they ignore him and continue their cleaning around the facility. Desperate, the young man cancels his date with Becky, and sets off with the cleaning tools, trying to protect his electric coils, which, thanks to the flood, create a huge shock area around the water. In the middle of the confusion, the young man ends up falling off his coil, but before he can be electrocuted, David is saved by Balthazar, who disperses all the magic. Angry at everything his apprentice has caused, the man reprimands him, but the young man says he no longer wants to continue his training and leaves, as he doesn't believe he really is the first Merlinian. A few minutes later, Balthazar realizes that David has returned to the lab, saying that he didn't want to hurt his master, but when he notices that the university student isn't wearing his ring, he realizes that this isn't his real student. Before he could react, the wizard ended up being hit by a magical attack from Drake, who had transformed into the young man to ambush his target, and after being thrown against one of the coils, he was trapped by the copper wires. At that moment, Horvath appears, and now that he has his receptacle in hand, he prepares to finish off his enemy, but Balthazar manages to free one of his arms, and after throwing his opponent away, he hits Drake with one of his spells. Furious, Horvath tries to eliminate the man with his magic knives, but before his master can be hit, David arrives on the scene and uses his dragon ring to intercept the blades. Realizing that the young man has returned, the villains decide to flee with the receptacle and are quickly pursued by Balthazar and his apprentice. Realizing that they will need more speed, the wizards modify their cars, turning them into sports cars and making the chase even more chaotic. Trying to outwit them, Horvath uses his staff to put a spell on a large window in the middle of the street, causing Balthazar and David to be trapped in the inverted world. Annoyed, the wizard continues his pursuit, running madly along the roads while trying to reach one of the windows of the buildings, which are rapidly being destroyed by his enemy. Despite this, Balthazar advances towards a large piece of glass, passing through the portal just before the object breaks. Now that they're back, they continue the chase, but when they notice the huge vehicle their opponents are piloting, the wizards get scared and are forced to flee. To help his master, David tries to convert the structure of the vehicle into something larger, but the car ends up being transformed into an old automobile, which is quickly defeated by Horvath, and now that they have managed to hit their opponents, the Morgans flee the scene. The next day, Horvath explains that he will need a great deal of energy to free Morgana, so the man decides to betray his assistant by using a spell to petrify him and steal his magic ring. With this, the evil sorcerer gets the power he needs to free Abigail, the last prisoner in the container. The girl quickly captures Becky, and after they meet again, Horvath decides to eliminate her too, as he needs a lot of energy to free Morgana. A few hours later, the pair find the Morgan's hideout, but after separating from his apprentice, Balthazar ends up being caught by a shifting carpet spell, which begins to sink him into the ground. Realizing that he will quickly be buried if he stays there, the man tries to control the chains around him and uses the decorations in the room to escape the trap. Meanwhile, David ends up being surprised by Horvath, who threatens to eliminate Becky if the young man doesn't give him Merlin's ring. At a loss for what to do, the sorcerer's apprentice hands his magic ring to the man, who leaves immediately afterwards. Upon discovering that Horvath has fled, Balthazar decides to set off towards the resurrection site to confront Morgana and orders David to remain in the building, as he won't be able to use any of his spells. Despite this, the young man doesn't give up on helping his master, and after meeting up with his friends, they attach one of the Tesla coils to Balthazar's car so that they can electrocute the Morgans and deactivate their powers. In the city center, Horvath places the receptacle on the ground, and after casting his release spell, the villain manages to free Morgana, who reveals that she has taken possession of Veronica's body. Now that she is free, the evil sorceress orders her disciple to get rid of the doll, while she prepares to begin the ritual of resurrecting the deceased. Soon afterwards, the wizards use the antennas on the buildings to reflect their magical energy, and on noticing the traces in the sky, David asks Becky to go up to the terrace of one of the buildings so that he can interrupt the signal during the ritual. Balthazar tries to approach Morgana without being spotted, but when he notices that Horvath is about to destroy the receptacle, the man gives up hiding and saves the object from the flames. Quickly, Horvath hits his opponent with the magic staff, and after throwing him away, he uses a spell on one of the statues in the area, causing the golden bull to start moving aggressively. Desperate, Balthazar flees through the streets while trying to dodge the creature's horns, which destroy several cars around the site. At that moment, Horvath throws a letterbox towards his opponent, who is hit by the object, causing him to be defeated in a few seconds. Thanks to this, Balthazar is quickly defeated by the sorcerer, and before finishing him off, the man states that the ritual is almost complete. At the center of the circle, Morgana is getting closer and closer to completing the resurrection of the deceased, causing hundreds of evil spirits to start roaming freely in the world and invading the bodies of thousands of tombs across the planet. When all seemed lost, David arrived on the scene with his bobcat and shot a bolt of lightning at Horvath, while the metallic eagle captured the golden bull and took him far away. At the same time, Becky manages to deflect one of the antennas from the buildings, causing the ritual to be interrupted and all the zombies around the world to be quickly disintegrated. Thanks to this, the villain ends up being knocked out by her own spell, and noticing that the evil sorceress is still in her partner's body, Balthazar decides to absorb Morgana's soul. In doing so, the sorcerer is quickly possessed by his opponent, who, after sucking all his energy, jumps out of his body, causing Balthazar to be knocked down instantly. Now that she is free, Morgana tries to finish off the trio with her flaming spells, but at that moment, David stands in front of his friends and manages to protect them from the wall of flames. Realizing that the first Merlinian is finally able to use magic without the aid of Merlin's ring, the sorceress is furious and hits Balthazar with her electric attacks. Worried, Veronica rushes to her teammate's aid, while David tries to hit Morgana with his plasma beams, but the young man ends up hitting the site's power cabin, causing the woman to run after him. Despite trying countless times, the sorcerer is unable to hit Morgana, as the villain manages to dematerialize all the time, and after dodging the young man's spells, she starts attacking him again and again. However, all of this is just a distraction, because during the fight, the power cables in the electricity booth come to life and head in their direction. Just as he is about to be finished off by the woman, David manages to launch his final attack, where the wires connect to the lampposts and turn them into Tesla coils, which begin to electrocute Morgana several times. Immediately afterwards, the first Merlinian fires several plasma spheres at the woman, who begins to disintegrate, while all the energy in New York City is drained by David's spells. At the end of the fight, the young man realizes that Balthazar is no longer alive, but he doesn't give up, and after creating a circle of fire around him, the sorcerer's apprentice begins to electrocute his master so that his heart will beat again. After a few seconds, the man returns to consciousness, and now that the world has been saved by Merlin's disciples, David searches for Horvath, but the only thing he finds is the wizard's hat. Considering that the villain has escaped, the youngsters decide to celebrate their victory and plan their next trip alongside their metallic bird and their new sorcery masters. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.